Hello, this is Miss Baukamp, and today we're going to talk about ragtime music. Well, first off, ragtime, we usually think of piano, but the beginning of ragtime sound was actually more piano music and, of course, other orchestration and singing. Singing was very important. It was considered more ragtime at the beginning of the era. Sources of ragtime rhythms actually came from the Caribbean. Caribbean dance rhythms included the danza and the habanera. We're going to watch a little cartoon called Hello My Baby, and in this cartoon we're going to get a really good idea of what the original ragtime sound was.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
It's a cute little cartoon, but it gives us a good idea of what that original ragtime sound was. What we better know is ragtime as piano music, though. Now, initial stages included piano renderings of ragtime songs, so they would take Hello My Baby and make it into a piano song. The ragging of unsyncopated music, so taking a song that wasn't syncopated and making it syncopated. Well, what is syncopation then? First we need a beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Syncopation is on the offbeat. So whenever I say syncopation, think offbeat. The offbeat will be on the ands. And. Syncopation. Notice how it wasn't when I clapped? Syncopation's on the offbeat. And also included in the initial stages of ragtime as piano music is original compositions, and one of the most famous composers is Scott Joplin. We're going to listen to his song The Entertainer on the mechanical player piano. Now, the piano was a very important feature of the era of ragtime. Many rags only appeared in piano rolls. Now, piano rolls are punched on paper. They were never published in sheet music form. Why is this? Well, a lot of it was very hard to play. As a result, ragtime became very popular across the country, and so it wasn't just stuck in one area. It wasn't just in Memphis. It wasn't just in the South. It wasn't in the North. It was everywhere. It became so popular, instructional books and lesson studios became available and were very successful, but the player piano was one of the most important features. Let's listen to Scott Joplin's The Entertainer. Notice we've got a piano roll here. This is paper with punches in it, and it runs the entirety of this machine. You'll learn more about that today. Musical characteristics are very important. Syncopation, as I've already mentioned, was one of the most important. It assumes we have that steady underlying beat, that 1, 2, 3, 4. Syncopation can't exist without this beat. The syncopated beat was supplied in ragtime by a steady, what they call oompa of the left hand. So, oompa, 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 oompa. Well, the right hand has the melody, and essentially all of the accents of the melody would land on syncopated notes, on the offbeat. The form is very similar to the march. In fact, we're going to listen to another one of Joplin's songs, Maple Leaf Rag, and I'm going to point out our 3 sections. Now, it's called a trio section because of the 3 strains we're going to hear. So first we're going to start with the first 2 strains, and I'll skip ahead to the third. And the second strain. Once again, the second string. Oh, it's going to find the third string. Here it is. So notice that there's three very separate parts, but the third string is the most like a march. There are two offshoots of ragtime that we definitely need to talk about. Before we do, though, I'd like to talk about the decline of ragtime. Piano ragtime inclined toward what became known as jazz, and it merged with jazz for a time, and the two terms were used interchangeably, similar to how jazz and blues were used interchangeably. Now, the two offshoots are important. We have stride piano, also known as Harlem piano. We're going to listen to James Price Johnson, and you'll notice a steady left-hand rhythmic pulse and a syncopated right hand. So essentially all the higher notes are syncopated and the left hand is on the beat. We'll listen to this one right here. Notice that the left hand, the lower notes were on the beat. Now the other thing is novelty piano. It's a show-off kind of piano and it's made to sound more difficult than it really is. Now this one is called Dizzy Fingers and you can see it's on a piano roll. We're going to listen to this one now. Did you notice how the bass sounded almost identical to the one we listened to over here, If Dreams Come True? Very similar bass lines, but this novelty piano is meant to sound more complicated, and that's why they call it Dizzy Fingers. It's more show-offy. Now another important thing we need to talk about too, before we get into the Black Dance Orchestra, is precursors of jazz, because really we're looking at what happens before jazz, and ragtime was huge in pushing us into jazz. So minstrels were important, ragtime was important, and the blues. But those were not the only ones. Those were just the most public genres that we're familiar with and more audible. That means we heard them more often. African and Caribbean music also had a huge impact on jazz. Let's talk about the Black Dance Orchestra. James Reese Europe founded the most famous clef club. In his orchestra, gave public concerts. In his dance orchestra, he aimed at developing something that was different and distinctive, and it lends itself to playing more specific compositions, and he wanted to keep it true to African roots. Two features distinguish his orchestra from our standard orchestra of the time: an increased importance, well, often dominance, of drums and other percussion, and large numbers of banjos and mandolins. Remember how much percussion we used when we studied African music? He was trying to stay true to that. Now, an interesting part of him is that he was commissioned as a line officer in World War I. It's in 1917, and he was the leader of the band. Now, the members of his band fought as combat soldiers and the 369th Infantry Regiment, and they were known as the Hellfighters, one of the most highly decorated units of war. If he hadn't died soon after returning home from war, he probably would have had a more prominent role in jazz. Let's listen to a short snippet of Castle House Rag. Hear the percussion? His music really started to push us toward that big band sound. Another important one is the black brass bands. Now this is super important in New Orleans. They were small bands of only 10 or 12 people. They included trumpets or cornets, alto and baritone horns, trombones, tubas, clarinets, and drums. Now think of a parade band. When you go to a parade and you see a marching band walk down the street, this is essentially kind of that beginning idea of, they would march in parades, they were hired for funeral marches or dirges, so essentially when they're walking a casket down the street, they were hired to play music with it. In fact, we're going to listen to one. It's called Eternity. This would have been played as they're walking the casket to the cemetery. Notice how there's a lot of brass sound going on right now. You hear those trombones and tubas. You're not hearing a lot of woodwinds like the clarinets, but they are there. That sounded very slow and almost depressing, and it's meant to. That was a song played right before the intense part of the funeral when they buried someone. The second one I'm going to show you traditionally was played as you were leaving the cemetery. Now it seems a little strange. It's not anything like Eternity. This is called Just a Little While to Stay Here. And this particular song is a really good example of the upbeat jazz version of a hymnal tune. So essentially, this is an old hymn that they jazzed up and made it more upbeat as they are leaving a funeral. Notice how much more upbeat that is. So we had prior to the funeral and after the funeral, and these were very important in New Orleans, and it really spurred the influence and beginning of New Orleans jazz, which is very important to the beginning of all we're going to learn about jazz. This is all we're going to talk about for Ragtime today. If you have any questions, make sure you write them down or write them on Google Classroom. I'd be happy to answer them. Soon you'll be moving on to another group. Keep working hard. I'm really proud of you guys. Have a good day.